Hello, I'm John Nichols, and for 42 years I was a GP or family doctor in the town of Guildford, near London. Now I'm retired with lots of free time to do things that I enjoy, like going on holiday, meeting old friends. One of the things I like doing is asking difficult questions, seeing if I can answer them. So here's a really big question for you. And I'm going to bring it up on the screen. There it is. Does science fiction give us some reliable idea of the future of humanity? Well, talk to people of my generation and a lot of younger people too. Think that humanity doesn't have a very big future, that will probably be extinct in 200 years' time. Runaway global warming, nuclear holocaust, supernova. And who cares? As long as my life is enjoyable, who cares what happens after I'm gone? Well, yes, I do care. I do care about what happens for my grandchildren and my probably great grandchildren and the future of humanity. But what can we learn from science fiction? Some predictions in what I call pure science fiction by the likes of Isaac Asimov and Arthur C. Clarke have turned out to be very accurate. And these guys were proper scientists as well as authors. I mean, Arthur C. Clarke's stories about the exploration of the moon, traveling to the moon, turned out to be pretty darned accurate. Now, another thing I do in my retirement is I'm involved in what's called the University of the Third Age. We are oldies who enjoyed being students, enjoyed going to university, and now that we are retired and have time on our hands, we enrich our retirement with university-like activities, such as this lecture. University of the Third Age lecture. And we organized a lecture like this to look at exactly this question about science fiction and the future of humanity. So we used it to determine which predictions in science fiction are likely, which are unlikely, and which are just plain ridiculous and impossible. So here are the likely predictions. Space travel, because it's already happening, let's face it. What about taking it a step further and having a Martian colony? Well, one of our members, our leading members, Professor Philip Harris, professor of physics, said, why should that ever happen? It's just too darned expensive. Who would pay for it? My answer was, well, maybe not just now, but in 200 years, in 500 years, in 1,000 years. You're saying nobody will ever just set up a research station on Mars, even. At the end of the day, we had to agree that it was quite likely at some time in the future. Likewise, we're already exploring our own solar system using robotics, and it looks very likely that we would want to explore other solar systems by sending robotic probes out to other star systems. Now, next on the list, wormholes in space. And this keeps cropping up in science fiction. And you may dismiss that, but actually, in theory, in physics theory, it seems very likely. And even physicists have done laboratory experiments to produce mini wormholes, which they have demonstrated as being a real phenomenon. So wormholes in space seem quite likely, but it doesn't mean that going into a wormhole will take you to anywhere you really want to go. Genetic engineering and life extension, these two come together as a package. First of all, genetic engineering is already happening. For instance, there's a very nasty condition called sickle cell anemia. It's not just anemia, a very painful sickling crisis. It's a lifelong thing. It's genetically based. And it is possible to fiddle with the genes using CRISPR-Cas9 for gene editing to produce pretty much a complete cure. Unfortunately, it costs about £500,000. So it's not available to everybody with sickle cell anemia. And life extension is just another example of how gene editing using CRISPR-Cas9 and other tools could change our genetic makeup so that we live longer. And there are other ways of tinkering with our physiology, which I won't go into in great detail, that could mean that it's possible in the future to live quite healthily to about the age of 200. Eventually, time will catch up with you, but that seems to be a possibility for the future. But again, pretty darned expensive. Artificial intelligence, we know, is everywhere. It's in medicine, it's being used in medicine, it's being used in business, it's being used in research, and it is turning out to be very useful, despite worries about whether it will get out of control, which we'll deal with later. Life forms, alien life forms elsewhere in the solar system or beyond the solar system, they got to be there. I mean, life has evolved on this planet. Why should it not have evolved on some of the moons of Saturn, perhaps? But it's probably not going to be more than just microscopic bacteria-like life forms. Nothing really interesting. Now, next is the negative. Nuclear holocaust, catastrophic global warming, which can wipe out the human race sometime in the next 200 years, as many people seem to think is likely to happen. And yep, I'm afraid these things are very likely, and they're probably going to be linked, because if global warming makes life very difficult, it's going to create wars which will get out of hand, and there'll be a nuclear holocaust. It all sounds pretty awful, doesn't it? And it is something we have to get a grip on. Global warming, that's for sure. Next on the list, brain downloading and uploading. What do I mean by that? Brain downloading is if I was able to download my brain onto a computer. And with artificial intelligence galloping ahead the way it is, it seems quite feasible that that will happen sooner or later. So it's maybe a form of artificial immortality, not true immortality, because it's a copy. But uploading means uploading it onto an Android robot. So you've preserved yourself in a computer program, and now you have made an Android robot, which may look very much like you did before your biological death, in which you walk and talk and sense the world around you. That keeps cropping up in science fiction. And I put it to you that there's no reason that I can see why it shouldn't be possible, and indeed probable at some time in the thousands of years ahead. Next is cryostasis. Now, cryostasis, again, it's real, it happens, but not in humans. It can be seen in nature, in insects and in frogs and other small animals, that when winter comes and they freeze, then because they've died. But when spring comes and they thaw out, they get a little twitch and a shudder, and off they go again. So that's a sort of suspended animation, which would be very useful for space travel, wouldn't it? But it's not possible in humans yet. But if it is possible in nature, in amphibians and insects, maybe one of these days we'll work out how to make it happen for humans, and that would be a possibility for colonizing a distant planet. Maybe. Mining of asteroids is again a recurrent theme in science fiction, and those who mine asteroids can become extremely rich. What do you mine them for? Well, surprisingly enough, the most important thing is not the minerals, but water. Water in outer space is so useful because you can derive from it hydrogen for fuel and oxygen for breathing. And this makes life in outer space a real practical possibility if you can mine those asteroids for water. But also all these important minerals, iron, platinum, nickel, and many other metals, tungsten, etc., etc. It could be an extremely profitable business, and indeed people are already investing in a future. There are firms that are planning to mine asteroids, and people are investing in them. So last on my list is invisibility technology. Now that does sound like magic, but I put it to you that camouflage is becoming so good that it is bordering on invisibility already. The sort of camouflage that a person can use to hide himself could blend into invisibility. The cloaking of whole spaceships, as in Star Trek, might be more difficult and maybe impossible. So let's go on to a page full of things that are unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. Extinction of humanity by a rogue artificial intelligence. And I put it to you that the Terminator scenario, in which this seems to be a risk, of course, our heroes prevent it from happening in Terminator, but this is something that people worry about, that there'll be some sort of big brother AI that decides to wipe out humanity. But for reasons I'll go into later, this seems unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. Alien invasion is another unlikely. It's possible, but if you think of the vast distances of space that aliens would have to travel from their star, which may be a long, long way away, why would they bother? Terraforming Mars is a possibility, but unlikely for one good reason, that is no magnetosphere. On Earth, we have this protective umbrella, the magnetosphere, that protects us from solar radiation. And this is created by a churning liquid metal core in the center of the planet, which generates this magnetosphere, this magnetic field, which protects us. However, although Mars did have this at one time, this liquid core solidified and the magnetosphere disappeared, and the solar radiation streamed in, blasted the poor planet, blew away most of the atmosphere, and made it a wasteland. And rebooting the magnetosphere would have to be the first step in terraforming Mars, and I just don't see that happening. Then we come on to reincarnation, immortality, bodily immortality, human resurrection. I don't see this as likely. Religion believes in a soul, which might be true, but I don't see evidence for it. And all these possibilities, including zombies and angels, etc., require the idea of an immortal soul. Genetic resurrection of extinct species, as in the film about a dinosaur park. Well, there is a flaw there in that it was based on the idea that fossilized mosquitoes that had drunk the blood of dinosaurs containing their DNA were used as a source of the DNA to resurrect these extinct species. But science tells us this DNA is so badly corrupted that this would never be possible. Now, as well as unlikely, we have the category very unlikely, at Professor Philip Harrison's suggestion. Teleportation, subspace transmission, starships patrolling the galaxy and colonizing the galaxy, as in Star Trek, again, seems very unlikely. Teleportation, well, Professor Jim Al-Khalili, famous scientist, author, and media guru, said don't rule out teleportation or even time travel, because theoretical physics suggests they're not completely impossible. But if we're being realistic and talking about the future of humanity, I don't think we can include them in our future scenario. So thanks for the suggestion, Jim, but we're probably going to rate them very unlikely or impossible. Likewise, space travel faster than light, which is part of the Star Trek scenario, is very unlikely. And Professor Philip Harris says that as you approach the speed of light, mass increases vastly, slowing you down, so that to accelerate any further becomes physically impossible. So travel faster than light will probably never be possible. Stepping into alternative dimensions, an idea that there are 7 dimensions in science has been suggested as part of string theory, for instance. Well, maybe, but you can't just step into these dimensions. And likewise, split timelines of nodes in time where something critical happens and the timeline splits into 2 realities. Stepping between these 2 realities, I think it is more fantasy than science fiction, and I'm rejecting that as very unlikely. Telepathy, very often used in science fiction scenarios, but it's been investigated scientifically. Controlled experiments showed it probably doesn't happen, so very unlikely. The theory that our world is a simulation, well, I mean, if this isn't the real world with risk of harm and everything that goes with it, I'll eat my hat, so I'm rejecting that. Panspermia is the theory that life spreads through the universe from star system to star system in asteroids and things of this sort. It seems a poor theory insofar as the theories about how life could have evolved on Earth seem far more satisfactory and more likely. So I'm rejecting that as maybe not impossible, but very, very unlikely. Now we go on to the impossible, and there I put time travel. Despite what Jim Al-Khalili says, I think that's probably impossible. Precognition, knowing the future before it happens, again, has been scientifically researched in controlled experiments, doesn't work. Flying like Superman, who can believe that? It's pure fantasy. An interesting one in science fiction is engineering hollow worlds and ring-shaped massive worlds. The ring spins in this Ring World novel by Larry Niven, the most enjoyable novel. It spins so that the inside of the ring is a vast areas, 100 times greater than a planet with many civilizations. But scientists tell us that no substance will be strong enough to support these sort of structures. So I'm saying, so far as I'm aware from scientific reports, that is impossible. Curing illness with magic just annoys me, because magic doesn't belong in our science fiction scenarios, not in true science fiction. As for spontaneous bodily mutation, where a person overnight mutates into another creature, a giant insect or something, as in Kafka's story Metamorphosis, in which a man wakes up one morning to find he's mutated into a giant beetle overnight. Well, Kafka offers no explanation as to why and how this has happened. And I find it difficult to suspend my disbelief in this famous story. It doesn't fill me with joy. It is very highly regarded, but not by me. And I'm therefore unable to enjoy the subsequent storyline in which he is slowly rejected by his family, who help him and feed him to begin with, and then just leave him to starve to death. So I think we can reject that as impossible. We go on from there to telekinesis, another of these psychic phenomena. If I can, by the power of my mind, make this tumbler of water float in the air, that's telekinesis. And that again has been scientifically investigated in controlled experiments. It just doesn't happen. Storylines of aliens impregnating a human, impossible, because the DNA of an alien or any other species would be so completely different from human DNA that they'd be unable to align in a fertilized egg, and that therefore the embryo could never form. It just can't happen. What about mutant giant insects? The storyline there is a scientist has found a way of making little things large, a sort of super magnifier, and produces a giant fly or ant or something that terrifies everybody. Well, they wouldn't be so terrifying because the laws of physics say that as mass increases, the relative surface area decreases, which means that the breathing apparatus of an insect would be totally inadequate at that size, and they would very quickly asphyxiate to death. Shape-shifting aliens, a fantasy, immortal vampires, werewolves, and other shape-shifting entities. I'm rejecting them, and most of my group agreed that that is not part of the future of humanity. So here are my conclusions. You can see here that a robotic module arriving at a distant planet, and no humans in it, just an AI that is going to survey the planet and report back to the human beings, if any human beings are still left by then, because it takes hundreds and hundreds of years to do. So is this what will happen in the future? And subsequently, is colonization ever possible? Or will humanity self-destruct or fall foul to a cosmic disaster like a supernova? Well, there's a good chance that humanity will be wiped out. This was the general consensus. It's a sad thing to think that despite all our efforts, humanity may not be around in 1,000 years' time, because we have been around for thousands of years, you know. But this is a real risk. Maybe a 50% chance, but that does mean there's a 50% chance that we won't be wiped out and we'll go on. And the other possibility is, even with a nuclear holocaust or runaway global warming, there will be some survivors who can rebuild and rebuild better, wisely and better. So there's a good chance that if we dodge the bullet, survive for 1,000 years or more, we may well go on as a living entity for billions of years. Some of my group were a bit skeptical about this, but I can't see any reason why not. However, if we're going to make ourselves present around the universe in some form, we have a responsibility. The Greek philosopher Protagoras, 2,400 years ago, said, man is the measure of all things. And if that takes us beyond this planet, let us do this in a responsible way. We should show ourselves to be responsible stewards of planet Earth. No, we're not doing too well at the moment. We've got to get our act together there. But if you mess up your own backyard, that's bad enough. Messing up somebody else's backyard, some other Earth-like planet, would be even worse. It would be a sin. more about artificial intelligence. It's safe to assume that artificial intelligence will help us to avoid global warming, will help us to achieve these ends, and will help science to continue on its upward trajectory so that we may well do great and wonderful things in the future, things that we can't even imagine at the moment. This is what I feel is, at least, as I say, a 50% chance that this is the way things will go. So what about the Terminator scenario? Well, against that is the fact that it seems very unlikely that there will be one big brother AI which wants to wipe out human beings. The scientists who are involved in AIs, on the whole, agree that this is not going to happen. There will be a population of AIs that may be jostling for position, like politicians, and the leading AIs may have great debates about important things like the future of humanity. And they may see us as sweet, silly things that they want to protect, just as we like to protect wildlife. So they may even realize that some are not so silly after all, and that there are some actually human beings that are worth having an opinion from about issues. Another thing about AI, which people tend to forget, is that human beings are highly motivated by our instincts, by our survival instincts, by sexual and reproduction instincts, and many other important animal instincts that give us a motive for carrying on and achieving great things, not only as parents, but also as scientists and creators and creative in so many ways. And this is animal motivation, basically, which spills over into culture. But where does the AI get its motivation from? How does an AI decide what's good and what's bad? I think it inherits its motivation from us, and therefore AIs are going to be kindly disposed to us. So is a rogue AI a sort of mutation that would want to wipe us out? Is it a possibility? Yeah, it could happen. It's something we should be aware of. Well, in summary, humanity may not survive the next 200 years, but if we do survive, if we do dodge the bullet, as I put it, we could go on for billions of years and do great things. Anyway, that is the general consensus of the Guildford University of the Third Age, as reported by me. If you're interested to hear more about my opinions on the future of humanity and other matters, why not check my website, which is in blue there. I've written 2 science fiction novels myself, and you can see there's one of them, and also a book of short stories, which include a lot of science fiction. So if you look at my website, you'll find there are excerpts from these books and from books I've written on nutrition and science as well. Lots of, I think, interesting excerpts which you might enjoy. So that's me finished, and goodbye. Goodbye. Goodbye.